No other race on the face of the earth has suffered as much discrimination as the black race. If you're not black, if you're taking in this video today and you're not black, you cannot even begin to imagine what it is like to be discriminated, judged well in advance, just because of the color of your skin. I have personally felt the heat of being a black African on Kenyan soil. And not once, not even twice. But we still have many blacks all over the world who don't think it's such a big deal. They ignore or they don't realize the long-term effects going forward. For instance, what kind of world are you going to leave behind for your children and your grandchildren? And this is why the George Floyd incidents in the United States and the repercussions right across the globe is an excellent opportunity for all people of African descent, wherever in the world they may be, to take a firm and decisive decision. You know, many decades ago, there were a people who were faced with exactly the same situation that Africans are faced with today. Unfortunately, they took a decision, indeed the only decision a people facing such a fate can take to reverse the situation. Against mind-boggling odds, they returned to their origins. Now, before I tell you that story, let me back up a little. There are many people who think that activism, legislation, passing new laws, etc., can undo the damage that has been done towards Africans and people of African descent over the last 400 years. Now, stop and think for a minute. Don't you think that is being extremely naive? In this life, it is so hard to undo things that have happened over the last 10 years. In many instances, it is impossible. So, how can you convince me that it is possible to undo something that has happened over many generations for 400 years? Innocent children have come into this world and they have been indoctrinated into a certain way of thinking, a certain way of discriminating against a certain people. How is it possible to reverse that, even in the next 400 years? But then, admittedly, it is your right to have your views, even when those views are so laughably naive. Now, when the Jewish people returned to their home in 1948, it was not easy. For starters, they returned to a small piece of dirt that was mostly desert. No resources, no port, no nothing. But they were united in purpose, and they were united as a people. And it is very instructive to take a much closer look at what the status of the Jewish people is today. Number one, discrimination against Jews has not ended. Number two, there are very many who have still not returned to the homeland. However, and this is point number three and the most important, something has changed. Although discrimination has not ended against the Jews, in more parts of the world than you realize, I'm sure, Something very important has changed. The Jews now have respect. You don't fool around with them. Whatever you want to think, however many times you want to discriminate against them, you don't fool around with them. And in my view, the only way that Africans can change their current situation is by doing precisely what the Jews did so many decades ago. You see, the saddest thing in all these manenos is the fact that Africans don't realize how gifted they are. Africans don't realize the enormous contributions they have made to the various countries and places where they reside today. For example, take away completely all the contributions of African Americans in the United States, and you can be sure the US of A will not be as great as it is today. That is a fact, which simply tells you very clearly that if all Africans were in one place, one continent, that particular continent would be without doubt a superpower of the world. But even that would not be as important as the fact that the African and the person of African descent would change their situation from what it is today to one where everybody would be forced to respect the African. We know the discrimination can never end, but at least the African would be respected. And that is a much better position and situation to leave your children in. I appreciate the fact that many of you still think this is a crazy idea. But I am sure many have also not realized that by remaining in those foreign lands, and especially by being successful in those foreign lands, Africans are actually undermining their own original homeland. Africans, without realizing it, including African Americans, continue to make enormous contributions towards ensuring that Africa remains that place where Africans don't want to come back to. They don't even want to think about coming back to. But fortunately, and this is going to surprise many of you, the exodus back to Africa has already started. Yes, in a very, very small, tiny way, but it has started. I was totally amazed the other day when my research unearthed very many channels right here on YouTube promoting the return back to Africa. And I've put a few links in the description area below this video on YouTube that you can take a quick look at here and realize what I'm talking about. Now, we need to embrace the fact that nothing good comes easy. It will not be easy to move back to Africa. But in my view, it is the only thing to do. And I appreciate the fact that for many, it will take a long time for this realization to sink in. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.
Africa.
Wabariki